Hello, my Crystal Loves Texas Facebook and YouTube family. Listen, I am so glad to be back in the studio. Um, Boy, a lot has been going on in the last 2 weeks, to say the least. But I wanted to come back today and talk to you a little bit about some things that are going on or that we are anticipating happening in the Texas legislature come January. I believe it's going to be as early as January. But all of you who know me know that I am a public school teacher, and I've been doing that for a while now. And I love being a public school teacher, and I love what public schools represent. However, I've been a teacher in charter schools, in private schools. I've been a teacher in many of the different types of institutions that offer education in the state of Texas. And what we've actually been hearing it for probably about 5 to 7 years now. We've been hearing that our governor and state legislature is considering offering school vouchers and the voucher system here to public school attendees in the state of Texas. And I'm going to tell you, there's some mixed emotion about that, especially coming from public school educators. But today, I want to get some perspective, and I think it's really important that we all get a little bit of perspective on this and sort of hear from both sides as to what may be coming down the pike for Texas. So today I am bringing in a guest that I have known for, I think, probably almost half of my life. Yes, I think I've known him for half of my life, but he is a Texas educator and administrator. He's a principal here in Texas schools. And he is going to lend his perspective to this because he too has been in the charter school arena as well as the public school arena. But with no further ado, I'd like to bring in my guest today, Carlin Charleston. And there he is. Hey, Carlin.
Hello, Crystal. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, Carlin, I'll bet you we've got some people who are going to be sitting here watching. And if not right now, they're going to be sitting here watching with popcorn and soda, probably within the next day or so, because we've got some different perspectives. You've been in charter school since I have. It's been a minute since I've been there. But when you heard that this was possibly coming down the pike, what were your thoughts on this? And let me preface this. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you are an educational product of?
Yeah, and I think that's pretty important. And that gives proper context to anybody's comments because this is such a contentional issue that I think you've got to have the proper context so you can understand where everybody's coming from. But first of all, I grew up in a family of educators, mom and dad. And of course, in the 70s, there was only public school pretty much, so I definitely a product of that public school environment. And then after I graduated high school and college, went to the Marine Corps, spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, then realized that I loved teaching. I wanted to be a teacher. So I came back and went to the public school and began teaching and loved it. Realized, wow, I really loved it and did that for 12 years, got out of that. And then got back into the charter school arena, which is where I am now as a principal at a K-8. And so having that diversity of viewpoints, then I've got a particular, and then you add in the Carlin Charleston, Dwayne Charleston, I just like to argue anyway. And I got a particular viewpoint on all these things, but now with some knowledge of both sides of it. And so,
right.
So I've definitely got a lot of input on the pros and cons. So any questions you ask, I'll be ready to answer those. But that gives you the context of my background, because one of the things that you'll find as I have this discussion is that I always tell people the answer to most all questions in life are it depends. And so you'll hear a lot of that today when I talk about when you ask simple questions of which one is better. Well, right. It depends on your personal situation. So we'll talk about that.
Yes, and I'll jump right in and say this, Carlin, because this is something that, of course, is right now around the teacher workroom and lunchroom, and because people do not have all of the information, all that we can do, and I will say this, the information has not been presented to us yet in its entirety. So I think that when people have all of the information, they can uh, come from a much more informed perspective. But let me tell you what so many teachers are feeling right now, and probably a lot of people who may not be in education. This is what I hear. I hear that you know some of my school parents say this is going to be a great thing. These vouchers are going to be great because we get to send our kids to private school, and we get to choose where we send them, and our kids are going to have as great of an education as some of the kids in the more elite schools in the city or in our area. And here is the here is the reality from my perspective. I can only share my perspective. From my perspective, Carlin,
Mm-hmm.
let's say that vouchers, and I'm just giving a hypothetical here. Let's say that vouchers per student are, let's say, capped at $10,000 per student. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
for a student to be able to go to a school of their choice. However, a private school, I'm a product of a private school. Okay, I also went to my early education in public school, but a private school in this day and time with the climate of the economy and education, you may have a private school that is easily $25,000 a year, some higher. Okay, and if I've got a $10,000 voucher and I am a parent who is working a job, it may pay $35,000 a year, and our combined household salary may be $45 to $50,000 a year, and we've got three kids. Okay, where am I going to make up that additional $15,000 per child to send those kids to private school? Or is this something that was already known when these vouchers were introduced, that in reality children from disadvantaged families were not going to be able to make up that difference? What is some of the information that you've heard?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the downsides of the voucher program. So you got the pros and cons, and that is that economically, if your reason that you have not gone to a private school or an alternative school is economics, vouchers is probably not the answer, because you're comparing a voucher program that will give you a portion of your tuition to an ISD, which is no tuition.
That's right.
And so I'm still going to end up in the same situation. And so that's where I always say that that's the fallacy of alternatives, and
Right.
that is that it has to be either this or that. So there are other alternatives, and that's why I like my option, which is like the charter school,
Right.
because a charter school, a couple of things. First of all, a charter school, different than a private school. A private school is where it is, and most private schools, because of their potential for the type of education they're giving, are located in places where they can be properly funded. That means in communities where people can afford them. Whereas charter schools, such as the one that I'm in now, I mean, we're located right in the middle of an economic area where people cannot afford private
Absolutely.
schools or schools that would require tuition. And
Right.
so we are, in fact, a public charter. And I think people need to understand there is such a thing. So you can have a public school that is a charter school that requires no tuition.
Okay.
And so those are very viable options then for people who are economically disadvantaged. And so that's what people have to understand. There's a spectrum of alternatives, and they've got to decide what they're aiming for, what they want, because there's so many there's differences in curriculums that schools have and things like that. They're being offered because of these charter schools. And so those are things that are not necessarily part of the voucher system, because you don't have to have the vouchers for those options right now.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, and this is something also that is definitely a concern to some people, especially a lot of public school educators. the money for the vouchers has got to come from somewhere.
Mhm.
So, with there already being a lack of funding in for public schools now, where is this, money? It's not going to just come out of the sky. That money for the vouchers is going to come from, has to come from somewhere, and that is inevitably being pulled from taxpayer dollars for public schools that's already stretched so thin. I know that here in the Houston area, we have had, with a larger school district in the Houston area, we've had at the beginning of this school year, so many of the bus routes for the students had to be eliminated because of lack of funding. And just as the price of things go up, and the school funding does not go up, and in many cases it's gone down, you're wondering, where is this coming from? Is the wool being pulled over the taxpayers' eyes? What does the public need to know about this? Now you're sitting in the perspective, and I will put this disclaimer out there. I have taught in charter schools before, and I do believe that there is a place for charters, because I have seen charters come in and fill in the gap of offering services in some instances to students who really were at the end of their rope in an ISD system. And thank goodness charters were available to come in and fill in the gap for that. And with the smaller sizes, many times that they can really be able to offer those services that ISDs just may be stretched too thin to offer. But doesn't that come expressly from taxpayer dollars? And are charter schools getting our taxpayer dollars? You kind of break that down for us.
And so that's the issue that people have with the voucher program. So you've got private schools.
Right.
You've got people going to private schools, and they go to private schools because they can afford private schools.
Right.
You've got charter schools, and public charter schools operate on the same basis as ISDs. That is, the money follows the student. And so if I've got a student over here, then I get a certain amount of funding based on the number of students, which is the way ISDs are funded.
Okay.
So they're all funded that way. So the big issue that people are having now is, if I have a tuition of $10,000 for my student and I can afford that, and I'm sending my child to the private school, then why is the government now giving me more money to send my kid to that $10,000 school? So that's the problem that people have with vouchers, because private schools, then if they're subject to the voucher, they're getting additional funding other than that they were getting from their private school tuition. And so it's like, why would they get more money? Right. And so that's it. I mean, we're talking about it in a capitalistic society, and that's the problem, that you're funding those who already have the excess. And so, yes, in the public school arena, then that seems to make more sense, that the money follows the student, but not for private school purposes, because private schools, they get passes at a lot of state standards and all those other things, whereas all public schools are subject to the same state standards. And so those are the fights. And I think that's where people have a problem with Greg Abbott, because, I mean, really, and I'm sitting here in a public charter and going, I don't think that's necessary. I think what we're doing, and maybe I'm just tooting my own horn here, but I'm thinking what we're doing is, where we're in a neighborhood where people who cannot afford the tuition can then find access to a school that's like a private school, a charter school, that they can find a different curriculum. And if they agree with it, they can send their child there and it costs them nothing. And that seems to me to be a better option than saying, let's fund those who are already funded. I don't think that's a good idea.
Well, and you know what? And you correct me if I'm wrong. Although you are a public charter school, and there are yes, you're a public charter school. Are there charter schools that are not public?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, you got private charters and you have public charters. So the charter part is where I decide I want to have a school that has a curriculum where we play tiddlywinks and we become tiddlywinks experts. And that's just making a statement. So that is because we can create a nuanced curriculum for our school, and we get that. And, we can be private. We wanted to be a private school that does that, and we can do that. Now, that means they're free of a lot of the standards of the state and things like that. So that's why they would do that, because they decided they wanted to have a certain type of school. And so that's the difference. Now, when you become a public charter, now you're subject to the same standards as the publicly funded schools, such as regular school, ISD.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. When you start taking away a lot of people feel that there is a push here in the state of Texas to privatize education, period. Okay. A lot of people feel that there is a push to do that. And I know this, you are from a small rural town. Although it's a college town, it is definitely a small rural town. And a lot of people are of the idea that if education is privatized and we start going to this voucher system or allowing charter schools to come in, private charter schools or public charter schools, if they're, let's say hypothetically private charter schools want to come in and fill that gap in these small Friday Night Lights towns. Okay. And you have now a private charter school is, and this is how I explained it. And you correct me if I'm wrong. It can be very much like for lack of a better comparison, a Valero corner store. A Valero corner store only has to answer to the shareholders of Valero. Okay. They can decide if they want to sell Bluebell ice cream or if they only want to sell Ben and Jerry's ice cream. They can decide if they want to open up on Sundays or if they want to close on Sundays. They can decide that after 9:00 p.m. we're going to close and we're not going to sell gasoline, gas anymore, or we're not going to sell alcohol, or we will, they make the rules. Mm-hmm. A private charter school is very much like that, in that they can decide exactly what their curriculum is going to be. They can decide if they want to have football. They can decide if they want to have prayer in schools. All the different types of nuances that would go into something being privately owned, whereby before it was a public entity. When you have that type of stronghold on any industry, an education industry especially, that becomes a very, very slippery slope. And is that where we want to go with education now? I know that there was because I'm a history teacher, I know that there was a time in our American history where anyone who went to school, period, had to be a wealthier person. There was no public school system. And only, in the 1800s were public school systems actually put into place where, in every state in the nation, there was a perfunctory public school system in place. And even then, at the beginning, it was only for males. So when you have this kind of situation going on where people actually can decide exactly whether or not, you have schools that are used to having the big football teams and the bands and the basketball teams, and they travel everywhere, and the cheer squads that go and they are national champions. A lot of small towns have this kind of pomp and circumstance that is centered around their public school system. What happens to all that if public schools are privatized?
Well, yeah, of course.
Make charter.
Right. Any of those. So, and that's why it's so, because of course, whether they're private charters, private schools, public schools, or public charters, the issue is going to be really, what are you looking for? And so one of the good things about all of this is really, I think it does incentivizes what I call a school competition, because that choice element is there. And so it's almost like you're saying, let's open up the options and let the people decide.
Okay.
And I mean, so I think, and that's why I would not be prone to exclude any of these things, because I really do believe when people start looking at things like, I've got a private school over here and they got a tuition of $15,000. And then next down the street, I've got this public charter that's free, and they're offering dual languages just like this private school or whatever. And then they start seeing kids. And then after time, you go, really? I mean, and so you get that option, and that's the thing about school choice. If it really is choice, it's good. But it's when you don't have the choice, but you try to label it that way, that it becomes a problem. So I think at the end of the day, and it'll take some time. And that's the thing. It will take some time to for people as users, because one of the things I think is a reason some schools are charters, especially public charters, are not used more is because a lot of people don't know. They don't know that you actually have an option that can be like private school, but cost you no extra money, because we have this problem with some of our parents here. And I walk the community, and a mile away, and I say, yeah, we're a school right up the street. And they're not aware of it. So I think there's got to be things like you're doing right now, Kim, because you're doing a service right here where you're educating people on the options out there, because people don't know, and they hear the fighting that goes on between the legislature and citizens and schools, and all they know is, no, voucher is good, voucher is bad, but and they don't know what people are saying, what the arguments are. And so this will be very helpful to a lot of parents who don't understand. And I think when you probably look at some of the people in the legislature, they've taken a political stance on it, and they don't really know what's happening down at the campus level and how this is affecting everyday moms and dads and children.
Well, that's why I can say, because I have worked in both charter schools as well as public schools, I understand the benefit of having both. Okay, but like you said before, the point that many people are having a hard time digesting is that public taxpayer money is also going to be offered to people who can readily afford to send children to private school. And that's just going to, my sister and I had this conversation last week, and and she explained it like this. She said, let me just kind of put it like this. If that same $10,000 goes to to each family, one is living over here and they've got a per household income of $50,000 total. And you've got another family living across town. They've got a total household income of $175,000. Okay. And they've got their kids in private school, which they can afford because they've been doing it and affording it and managing that for some time now. So that same $10,000 won't be able to affect that family that is a $50,000 household at all, because in order to put enough money with it to go into a private school, and we know when we talk about tuition is just that. You've got uniforms after that. You've got books after that. Generally, your private schools are not going to have free transportation. So you've got to pay either to get your kids there or pay for transportation to take your kids there. So that extra $15,000, let's say, how are they going to come up with that for 3 students? So we're talking $45,000 extra a year to put those kids in private school. So that voucher will sit. And over here, where this other family across town, the $175,000 family is able to readily afford to send their kids there already. So they've got an additional $10,000 per student. They can take their family to Greece. You know what I mean? Because they've saved that much. So I think that's going to be where so many people are having a hard time really digesting something like that. And I have to say I can understand their frustration. And but on the other side of the coin, like you said, with charter schools like yours, your charter school is probably, I think, even more so than some of the ones that have been around 20 years. Your charter school is probably one of the fastest growing ones that I've seen come along in the last 5 years. I've never seen a charter school grow like that. What would you attribute that to?
Well, I think it's that we go where the people are that are looking for this kind of thing. And I really think we do that, especially, I mean, to be here right here in South Houston. I mean, when you turn the corner onto Orem off
Yes.
of MLK here and you see that school, you're wow.
It looks like a college.
Yes, what is that dynamic place doing right here? And it seems so out of place.
Right.
And that's exactly what I think really public charters and schools who are looking to meet the needs of families
Right.
need today, especially those families who can't afford the tuition of a private school. I mean, it just makes so much sense to place these types of schools in those communities that really need them. And I think because that's been the problem in our past in our history is that we have our ISDs and our ISDs have kind of, I'm not going to say they failed us. And, I'm here in Houston. So you're talking about a Houston ISD. Not saying they failed us, but that's a big monster that's just been very difficult to tame.
Right.
And so because it has, and there's been some bad things that have happened. And so people are looking for alternatives. We went through COVID and then people found out what was really going on in education.
Yes.
And a lot of them now have opted, and homeschooling has just increased dramatically. So people have started looking for other options. And so I think between those who are saying you got to stay here at home and those who are saying I've got to find another option, then some of those other schools, charter schools, public charters and private schools are now an option. But when you're in a community that's economically disadvantaged, now that private school that they've got to pay tuition is out of the question. So we're a great option for people. But I think, like I said, and we're not the only one, there are lots of alternatives out there. And I think people need to learn to shop around. So like I said, you're doing a great service to the people of however big this is, Houston area, Texas area, anybody who can watch this, doing a great service to them because they know that there are more options and they need to search those out.
For your school district, your charter school district, how many campuses are in the Houston area right now with your K through 8 as well as do you also in this area, do you have the secondary schools?
Yes, we do. And I should know those numbers off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I'm not here to advertise my school, IL Texas. I'm not here to advertise them. Even though I mentioned their name, but because I'm speaking as Carlin Charleston and not as from IL Texas.
Absolutely.
They'll play the disclaimer at the end of it. We do not endorse this.
Yes.
So, but we've got, and I've got to see how many K through 8s we've got.
You can ballpark it.
Two high schools. One is down the street from me, about 4 or 5 miles, and the other one's over in the Katy area.
Okay.
In the Katy area, we've got three K8s, and over in my area, we've now got 3 K8s. Oh, sorry, it's radio. And then there's also further out in the Cleveland area, we've got a what's called Liberty High School there, and we've got 2 K8s that feed into it. So
wow,
do the math and add all those up. And like you said, a lot of these are very new that just came on just in the last few years. So
okay. Well, let me ask you this really quickly. With your with the public charter concept, where we run into our challenges in public schools, is that now if we could I don't want to say eliminate, but if we could not have the behavior disruptions in the classroom, I think just the behavior disruptions, your public schools many times would absolutely flourish. But behavior disruptions are part of life, not just in the classroom, but just part of life in the public sector. Okay. Be it schools or anywhere else. So how do you all deal with that when you are a public charter school? Do you have to take all students? Are you selective with your students? We basically must take all students until they present a situation whereby it's a danger to themselves or other students or the staff. But how do charter schools make those determinations?
Yes. So that's one of the things. I think that's one of the advantages of charter schools is that they do not have the same acceptance standards. They do not have to adhere to the same acceptance standards of an ISD. An ISD, by virtue of their structure, then, for instance, if a student is caught vaping at school in an ISD, then that ISD can retain that student and send them to an alternative school.
Okay.
For our purposes as a charter, because we do not have an alternative school, we are able to expel that student, and that student then is remanded to the ISD, their local ISD.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that means we can clean house much more easily than an ISD.
Okay. But that's not necessarily the objective. The objective is to
Right.
be able to meet the needs.
Right. And that's the thing. And so because and here's the thing. So because you have those, but then if you understand the structure, then what TEA did last year, they changed the requirement for, like, if a student, because vaping became a very big problem. So TEA then said that they cannot remain in their original placement if they are caught with a vape. Okay. So what that meant for us was we don't have any other placement other than here.
Right.
So whereas in those other schools, other districts, they would have an alternative education facility, and that's where that student might go for a month or 2 months, and then they come back to the ISD.
Right.
Since we don't have that, then ours are expelled. So, yeah. So I say that it allows us to clean house a little more easily. But it also means that students have to be very careful here at our school, because you make one, you only can get that one mistake, and you're gone. Whereas in the ISD, I'm gone, but I can come back after I serve my time. I can come back. So that's a consideration which I think helps in our discipline from the outset, because we let them know that up front, and they understand that there are just times in life when you only get one mistake, or you don't get any mistakes, and you have a consequence.
Is there a such thing? I've always wanted to know this. I remember when I was teaching in charter schools, it was almost the opposite of what you just said. And this was 10 plus years ago, but many of the kids who were expelled from an ISD ended up at our charter school, because and I don't know how that happens, but we took many of the kids who if they did not come to our charter school, they were having to go to the county placement facility, which a lot of times the parents did not want that as an alternative, and they ended up with us. So yes, they knew at that point that it was the end of the road. If they stepped right and they were supposed to step left, then we could kick them out of there. But is there an alternative for students after they have gone to yours? Let's say that they cannot. Do you accept students who have been expelled from ISDs?
No. And that becomes a function of that thing that we call the charter, because the charter can identify the students that they will not accept. And so discipline happens to be one of ours. If there's a certain level of discipline, then we are free to reject. And our standard is expulsion. If a student, we don't take students who were expelled. Now, there are students who might have some conduct or discipline, but if they were expelled, then we use that as the basis for us to reject an applicant.
Are there schools that serve students who have come to the end of the road, or are they just remanded to the county schools at that point?
Normally, they're remanded to the local their ISD. That would be in the area that would service them, and that's the thing, because ISDs know that they have no option to say no.
Wow.
So they have to accept them, and they call it expelled to the streets. I mean, it's a term that they use, and the legalism is that they're to the streets, which means they have to go back to their ISD.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say you don't mean that.
No, it means that they're back to their ISD.
Okay. And if a student has been deemed dangerous to be in that ISD or to be around other students or staff members, what is the end of the road for public school students? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask you.
So public school students, first of all, and this is of course new legislation because of school shootings and things that have been happening. So for that purpose, then they're now, and their students of all ages now are being prosecuted for some felonies are easier for those youngsters to get. And so the local law enforcement then gets involved, and those students end up being remanded to juvenile detention or facilities like that as young as 10, 11, 12 years old. So that's what happens with them.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that we're going to reel this in and really have a good, I want to leave our viewers with a really good idea of what is coming down the road and what these vouchers actually mean. Because that, if you, I believe the information that Kim sent us in the state of Arizona, I believe there was a lotto for the vouchers. So every person did not get, every public school student did not get vouchers. I think there were 50,000 vouchers to go around. And we've got how many more kids than that in the city of Houston? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, do you believe that vouchers are a fair way of leveling the playing field?
Well, that's the thing, though, and like I said, because if you've got it, and because how much is my voucher worth? Is my voucher going to give me 80, 90%? And do I have the other 20 or 10%?
Yeah.
If I don't, it's you're wasting the time. And so what are we going to do? What are we going to do with these excess vouchers? What are we going to do when these vouchers are returned? What are we going to do when these vouchers are not used?
Yeah.
What's going to happen? Because I have no doubt that if those students were able to enter into a school requiring vouchers, a public or a private program,
Right,
then it's going to be beneficial for them. But if they're not used, then what good is that going to do? So vouchers, like I said, it all depends on, do you have, because I think what you're doing, and this is probably the people who argue against vouchers, this is their argument, is that you're talking about people who already have the funding. The rich get richer because they already had it, and they can now get a voucher to support them. They can afford an extra car, much bigger house, and all this.
nice vacation. Yeah.
Which is beyond the educational purpose of the voucher. Right. The voucher is supposed to be for education. So I think that's the problem with the vouchers.
Right. And this is coming, guys, from a Texas principal's mouth. If you could just state for the record, from your own perspective, where could that money for education possibly be better spent?
Say that again, Crystal.
Where could that money for education be better spent? Is there a place where it could be better spent than on the voucher system?
Well, and I think that's one of the things that our founder seized upon here, is that he realized that if that money is actually following the students, then and that's why I think, and I have to ask him, because this was 12 years ago now that he did this, and ask it. Matter of fact, our birthday is November 15th.
Okay.
Yeah. But I have to ask him that, because one of the things I noticed that he put he put some campuses in remote and economically disadvantaged communities.
Okay.
And made that available for them, because and the thing about, when you think about the taxes how our taxpayer funds are used, that's a better deal, because that's money that's already being given to education.
Right.
And the school itself is not trying to get more funding other than that goes with the student to an ISD. So this is normally funded. It's going to follow the school students in ISD wherever they go. So I think a public charter such as we are is just an extension of the ISD. We just have we have some more rules, but we're an extension of the ISD, and the money is spread for students to get their education at that place, and nothing is needed from the parents or anything else. So I think I would say that's the best solution. However, I would say that maybe there are some voucher programs, maybe that mirror that, or at least can accomplish that. So I haven't seen them, but maybe there would be one.
Well, for your last, just for a last word, let me ask you this, Carlin. How do you think, and do you think that we will ever be able to take the political aspect out of the educational process and go back to the business of educating the students? There was a time in this country when the public school system was a premier system. Mm-hmm. Even in small areas, mm-hmm. even in urban areas, people were proud to be products of the public school system. People were proud to be teachers and principals in the public school system. And now it seems like, just over the years, so many things have changed. The way that things are done, the way that a lot of the standards in ways have been lowered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is there too much of a political arm in education right now?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is definitely true, and I think it's really way more complex than that. And I think that there are so many different dimensions to this thing. But I think that what you're doing here and what we're talking about can enlighten people to understand how we can get back there. And when I say get back there, what I'm talking about is the idea that education is its own reward. And if we actually do education, just education, and we don't bring in all these other things
right.
that infringe upon that, because if you think about it, and I say it's complex because you've got the other thing about, we had vocational education. We had that Absolutely. As part of the system. And I think we kind of made a mistake when we said, everybody's got to go to college.
Right.
Because then we started creating schools that said, no, it does you no good to be a plumber. It does you no good to be an electrician. No, we actually need those things, and that should be part of our educational system. And so these public charters and these other charter schools said, well, if they're taking it out, we got to get that somewhere. Let's create a school that does that stuff. And so you got schools with all these things, with some of these vocational things that they took out. So we're trying to get back there. And so I think with this opportunity for people to select, and as parents get educated, as educators get more educated on, maybe it's okay for your child to want to be a plumber, to be an electrician. That can be okay. We need those. They're making as much money as people coming out. So we need those. And that's what I think. So this might be a way to get back, because if you have people now creating schools that cater to that need that we have, which we hope will happen. I haven't seen that happening large scale, but we still need those. And so you got more vocational technical schools happening out there now. And when we start seeing the big picture of how important those things are, then maybe our schools will get back there and realize that, hey, this is what we came from. We were actually have a school was very simple, and everybody was able to use their gifts, and the school supported them in their gifts.
Should voters directly be able to vote on that voucher system, or should it be something remanded to the legislature?
Oh, I think it's got to be voters. I mean, it's got to be the people. It's got to, because the people are telling you that, and because at the end of the day, the people are going to answer anyway. I mean, they're going to give you the answer, because that's like the same thing that happened with COVID. The people answered and said, now that I know what's going on, I'll educate my kids. And some of those probably won't ever go back to public schools. And so homeschooling has become a big deal. And so you've got a lot of that happening, in addition to the public charters and the private charters, homeschooling is probably at an all-time high as well. So,
yes.
But I think we should let the people make that decision. And I think if we continue to create great alternatives,
yes,
and we want to create options, and let the people decide, they're going to cast their vote with their money or with their decisions on schooling anyway.
And what last question would you have your parents who are at your school, the parents at your school, and the parents who vote at my school? What should we be demanding of our legislators? So many times our legislators, here within the last 10, 15 years or so, so many times their ideas and votes can be bought, and they're not really serving their constituents like they should. What should we demand of our legislators in terms of ensuring a fair public education for our students? What should we hold their feet to the fire with?
And that's tough, because you made the statement, and that's what we got to do. We should be asking our legislators, which is almost impossible. Sounds like a contradiction, to depoliticize education.
Yes.
Depoliticize it, because that has been the driving force in all of this, is that, why are you doing this thing? I mean, and because when you start looking at whether, is it nepotism? What are all these things that are allowing us to say, let's give the money to those who have the money and things like that? We've got to make sure that's not part of the process, and that we're back to basically the fundamentals of education and ensuring that every student has an opportunity people might reject it, but you want to provide them the opportunity, and there's no reason for them to say. And so that means that we properly fund, that we make sure our ISDs are not lacking, that they don't lose any funding that they should get, of course. And so we're talking about if they're able to get this much per student, that's exactly what they get. And they're not being cut out because we decided we wanted to give it to somebody who doesn't need it, such as a private school. We started funding private schools. That's kind of crazy. And people will say, well, yeah, but if they go to that school and they should, the money should follow them. Not if the parent has said, no, I'm willing to pay this tuition. We should get back to the idea that it should cost parents nothing, because America believes that we will educate your child. But if you choose something else, then you can pay for that. That's fine.
That's right.
If you choose something, you can pay for that. But let's not mix the two things. And so they got to depoliticize that so it's not political. And I really think that Abbott he did not have to make it that political, and I think he's made it that way, and that's where we are.
Let's be clear. He's not the only one. That seems to be the direction that a lot of states are going in. But we are about 2 minutes, and we're going to have to go ahead and say goodbye. But one thing I want to say is this, and I want people to be very aware of this. I said this last week on the podcast. We don't want to go back to a situation where you have an uneducated mass of people, because that's what monarchies and oligarchies thrive on, uneducated masses. And the more educated your people are, the more they're going to question their circumstances and situations. And it seems like in many ways we may be different contingencies may be trying to roll the clock back, but we've got to watch them. We've got to be the gatekeepers of what they're doing with our educational dollars and with education, period. But Principal Carlin Charleston, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspective. I knew you would have a great perspective because, like I said, you too have seen, you are the product of public schools. Now you are in a charter situation, and you've seen the benefit of both.
Yes. Hey, thanks for having me, Crystal. Outstanding. Great. And like I said, you're doing a great service because most people don't know a lot of this. And I think that's what we need. We need an educated populace, just like you were saying.
Thank you so much. And, we may be calling you again. It won't be on short notice the next time, but, you were able to chime in and help us out so much when we talked about the school shootings and what can be done possibly to help to avert some of that in the future. But thank you so much again. And as we say on my Crystal Loves Texas podcast, we can do it. See you later.